Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to What's the Point? I'm your host, Bill Ellis, with another fascinating guest today. Elizabeth Rosenberg is a personal branding expert and communications consultant. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello, Bill. I was hoping you were going to sing the jingle for us today.
No. Before we recorded, I burdened Elizabeth with a jingle from my old New Orleans growing up days about a Rosenberg furniture store jingle, and that's all we'll do there. So Elizabeth is a personal branding expert, and having listened to the show before, you know that that's my field, and we've had other guests. Most recently, perhaps, Lita Citroen, who is also a personal branding expert. But with Elizabeth, we're going to hear things just a little bit different, a little bit unique, and I'm fascinated to learn more about that. Elizabeth is the founder and CEO of the Good Advice Company, which is a great name. So kudos for that. And
Thank you.
With that, let me just ask you, Elizabeth, tell us about the start of the Good Advice Company.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the kind words about the name of the company. It was actually named by my mentor and my old boss, so I can't take all the credit for it. We were sitting around and my lawyer was yelling at me that we needed to figure out a name quickly. And I think it's harder to name a company than it is to name a child. It's just the second you Google a great name, it's like somebody else already has it. And my mentor had said to me on the phone, well, you give great advice. Like, what about the Good Advice Company? And I was on the phone and I, looked up the website and GoDaddy. I'm like, oh my God, it's available. He's like, just buy it now. And if you don't use it, I will. And
Exactly.
It just kind of worked. So, don't get scared when you are going to name your company or name your project if it feels too obvious, because the obvious ones are always the ones that are available. The Good Advice Company launched in 2020. I actually quit my job on March 2nd of 2020, just a couple weeks before the world closed down.
Right.
And was going to start consulting in PR and communications, which is what my background is in. I've done that for over 20 years. And as I think the pandemic continued and a lot of people were looking for purpose. And I also think there was a lot of change in jobs and just kind of what everybody was really looking to do with themselves in the world. A lot of people started asking for personal branding help. And my job pretty much pivoted from really high level kind of strategic comms marketing into taking those skills with executives, leaders, consultants, and entrepreneurs. And it all has kind of evolved in a beautiful way that I never thought was going to happen. And here we are today. I'm doing personal branding and I have a job that I really, really love.
Well, that's terrific. It's yet another success story about the dire impact of the pandemic turning a silver lining. And you're not alone in this case. So you found the Good Advice Company name, and then you just picked up the phone and started answering all these people calling you because you had such a great name. No, seriously, how did you go about developing your approach to personal branding?
Yes. So my approach to personal branding is very different than most. The cat out of the bag is that
let me interrupt you very quickly. My apologies, but one thing I also should do more of is I want to make sure that we understand and that we're talking about the same thing. Give me first your definition of personal branding.
That's a great question. I work with executives, entrepreneurs, and people that are in a lot of career transition to create a personal brand for themselves that is media optimized for the world. Now, when I say personal brand, I mean, if you are not in the room, everyone knows what you stand for, who you are, and kind of your overall, what you have to offer the world. And my approach to personal branding is much more about who you are as a person versus what you do for a living. And where I really come in is threading the needle between those two worlds and applying a personal branding methodology that results in a beautiful kind of thought leadership plan that shows kind of the authentic version of yourself to the world. Very special
Okay,
people
great.
have to be ready for that kind of awakening themselves, because a lot of what I do, people are not necessarily even aware that that is their brand, that that is what they stand for, that that's
Right.
kind of who they want the world to be. I think part of what I do is pull the stories out of people that they don't think are important, but that the world needs to hear.
I love that, and I will also make a plug for you and myself and everyone who is a coach. Most of us do need a coach. I certainly have one, and we need that because we need the outside perspective. Um, my 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 wife says that part of her role is to hold the mirror up for me so that I can see what the rest of the world sees versus my sometimes tainted self-image, which I think is a beautiful thing. So we're going to get into your process a bit, but I just want to tease people a little bit and say it's a very unique and interesting basis, but I'm going to leave that so everyone will listen longer. In the short term,
There you
though,
go.
you have a personal branding process, which is 6 steps. Will you take us
It
through those,
is.
please? Starting, I believe, with intuitive data.
Yes. My steps, it's interesting, have also evolved throughout the last few years. When I first started, it was like 2 steps, and then it was 5, and now it's 6. So I think I also continue, as your personal brand continues to evolve, my process continues to
Mhm.
evolve. And I want to make sure that my clients are always getting what they need. So to take a step back a little bit, I was not planning on being a personal branding expert. I love communications. I love marketing. And when the pandemic hit, I was recovering from severe corporate burnout. I had been on my own health and wellness journey. And through that time, uncovered that I was very intuitive. It was funny because in every kind of job 360 review or anything that I had ever had done, everyone's like, oh, you're very intuitive. Well, that's the reality. I'm very intuitive, which was nice to hear back. And when the pandemic hit, so many people were looking for answers, and were looking for purpose, and were looking for hope. And I had started doing intuitive readings. And then throughout 2020, kind of word got around. I was like the underground medium for the marketing world. Word got around, and I did over 100 readings for C-suite leaders in Fortune 500 companies, startups, and consultancies. That was not my plan. And what was more not my plan was that these two worlds were going to collide, that all of a sudden I was going to be doing comms and kind of intuitive reading in one setting. So when you talk about the evolution of the process, I was actually doing a branding session with a leader at a Fortune 500 company who's just the best and amazing. And her guides came through in the middle, and I was like, oh no, I am so sorry. P.S. I do this on the side. No one really knows I do this. Are you even into any of this stuff? And she was like, oh yeah, tell me everything. What do you want? What's happening over there? And I ended up doing a reading for her, and I uncovered that if I could do an intuitive reading as part of the process, I was able to help really define your soul purpose, your life purpose, why we're meant to be here, what the blocks around your abundance are, why we tie in our personal life and our professional life, and why we separate them in so many ways. So that's kind of where my process came from. So my very first session with all of my clients, I don't even do a Zoom with them before. I do a 15-minute conversation. As you know, working from a coach and, working with clients too, pretty quickly if you're like, yes, you're a fit for me. No, you're not.
Mhm.
And there's clients I've talked to and I'm like, no, you need an executive coach, or no, you need a therapist, or no, you need a publicist. Sometimes people reach out to us for reasons that we are not necessarily the right fit
Yeah.
for. So I think it's a lot about dating. It's kind of like dating, right? You want to make sure that you're the right fit for the person that you're helping, and vice versa. So my very first session is an intuitive reading. And
Okay.
I'd say more than half my clients have never had a reading before. And
Yeah.
that is always
So
fun.
I'm sure it is. Hold that thought because I got a little bit ahead of myself trying to be cute, but
Yeah.
we'll come back to your branding process. But I think at this point we need to myself and the listeners need to have a better understanding of two things: what you're talking about when you talk about intuitive readings, but also
Yes.
how you got from where you were to where you are. So your background, like many of us, your background was corporate, the corporate world. You were in corporate PR working for an agency in Los Angeles, I believe. And
Correct.
you mentioned that you had gotten corporate burnout, but uh, tell me more. What was it you were doing, and what was it that led you to get burnout?
My career as a publicist, as a PR person, was never niche. I've always been in very different fields. So I've done everything from working with Norman Lear and traveling around the country with a copy of the Declaration of Independence to get young people to vote, to working for nonprofits, to working for sports, to working in music, to ending up in advertising. So the last 10 years or so, I've mostly been in the kind of advertising marketing field. I burned out at one of those jobs. I was working with one of the biggest brands in the world on one of the most famous ad campaigns in the world. And I really, really loved my job there too. It was very fun. But I was also responsible for over 300 offices. I was traveling. I mean, I think that year I went over 80,000 miles. I was working 70 hours a week. I mean, it was just, you can love your job and burn out. And I talk about that a lot too.
Mhm.
I think people only think that you burn out from your job when you hate it. But sometimes it's just, it's just too much for your body and your mind to handle. So I ended up burning out from that job, went to another job in marketing, and I actually really liked that job too. I loved the people that I worked with. And the reason that I ended up quitting right before the pandemic was just there was no more ceiling. There was nowhere for me to go in that job. It was just this
Mhm.
job was going to be my job for the rest of my life. And I knew that there was something more for me out there. And when I finally released control over this is what I want to do next, and this is where the next 5 years are going to take me, and was trying to plan every aspect of my life, is when I just started watching what was coming in, what opportunities were arising, what I was excited about, what I wasn't excited about. And that's really what led me to doing what I do today. And I love that you talk about working with a coach, because it is so important that you have that mirror. I love that your wife says that because it's so true. It's so important that you have that outside perspective that reminds you that the stuff that you're doing is important, but also kind of keeps you in check and keeps you accountable when you start to veer away from the things that actually bring you joy.
Mhm. So as you were going through this, Elizabeth, you were uh, burnt out, and then you were kind of seeing that the end of the road and the lack of opportunity is a better way of saying it rather than end of the road. But simultaneous to that, you were starting to expand and better understand and appreciate your own intuitiveness.
Exactly. I have suffered from migraine since I was 4 years old. So 40 years of migraines are really not a fun experience. And that migraine that put me in the hospital turned something on that pretty much said, like, I will do anything to get rid of this. I do not want to suffer from these for the rest of my life. And I started searching out other forms of healing, emotional, spiritual, physical, mental, therapy, different, medications that I could be on. And part of that process really started to uncover, I think, alternative forms of healing in terms of breath work, in terms of guided meditation, in terms of Chinese medicine. And those just continued to expand my ways of thinking. I mean, I would never say to anybody that I'm like new age or that I'm woo woo or anything like that. I'm very corporate. If you're just listening and you're just seeing, you're not seeing me. I don't look like a medium. I don't know what a medium looks like, but I always think that they look like somebody that you see in the movies.
Well,
And
as a
once
side
I'm
note, if
kind
you
of,
do want to take a look, this is also on the YouTube channel, the Branding for Results YouTube channel, so you can get a very clear look at Elizabeth Rosenberg, the non-woo-woo version.
there you go. And I just kind of leaned into what was making me happy and what was actually making me feel better, again, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And this uncovered itself in a really natural way. And when I stopped fighting it, it actually became really easy. And then during the pandemic, it's like the world got quiet and the spiritual world got loud. I think that was such
Okay.
a turning point for me intuitively, because I was able to see things differently and I was able to hear things differently.
So tell me more, help me understand uh, your intuitive data mining, your intuitive reading, if you will.
Yes. I practiced in the Akashic Records. It is something that I was completely unfamiliar with. Three different people in 1 week were like, you should meet this woman, Helen. And I feel like if a bunch of people tell you you should do something, you should look into it and check it out. So I looked online and her readings were quite expensive. And now I understand why. And she had a class that weekend. So I took her class because I was like, oh, I'm going to work the system and get a reading out of this class, and I'm going to get a 2-for-1 and it's going to be great. I did not get a reading out of her class, but it came so easily to me. So the Akashic Records are pretty much a library of your soul's journey, past, present, future. I did not really believe in any kind of reincarnation before I started doing this work. Past lives were always comical to me. But I've started to trust the things that I'm hearing. And when I do an intuitive session with my clients, I never know what's going to come through. Sometimes someone's, past loved ones come through. Sometimes their guides come through saying very specific things. The reader, my client on the other end, never knows what's going to happen, but they're always really positive. They're always great experiences for both myself and my client. And they unlock things that I wouldn't know about them, which I think builds trust. It also builds vulnerability and transparency, and allows us to get so much deeper into those stories that are important for them to share, but also any blocks that they might have that can be getting in the way of them harnessing their own superpower.
Okay, so thank you for that. And now I'm going to ask for this to get a little bit deeper because I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure I completely understand it at this point. So I'm going to ask you, what was the woman's name who you went to originally?
Her name was Helen Vonderheide. She is an Akashic Record teacher. She is amazing. She's very similar to me. She holds classes online and in person and kind of holds your hand the whole way. It was a very lovely experience. I've
Okay.
taken 3 different sessions from her.
Okay. So, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've done my own little bit of research, but you are the expert, and I freely admit that. My understanding is that Akashic, which for listeners that want to Google it, it's AKASHIC. And if you Google that, you will find also the Akashic readings and a whole bunch of other information. So AKASHIC. And what I've learned is that it's a combination of theosophy as a religion and a philosophical school of anthroposophy, if I said that correctly. So it's a combination of a religious approach and a philosophical approach. And I'm going to read this so that I don't mess it up. It's a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions, and intent, past, present, or future, of all entities and life forms, not just humans.
I
That's a
mean,
lot to
honestly,
get my
I
hands
hear
around.
that. I hear that and I'm like, who is this girl? That sounds crazy. I,
Well, it was
that
on
is
the
a
internet, so it
very,
must be
that's a,
absolutely true.
that is a very intense description. Also, I don't come to this with a religious leaning at all. I I really feel like it is just a one-on-one coaching session. I would talk to you exactly the way that I'm talking to you right now, with just messages from your loved ones and your guides about the best way to approach any issues, any problems, or anything that you are dealing with in the moment. So it feels like much more of a coaching session from your guides than it does of this kind of overwhelming library of universal energy. I mean, while it's fair, that is what I believe it is. It can be very overwhelming, I think, if we talk about it in that sense. So if everybody who's listening, it's not that scary.
Yeah, well, hopefully everyone is listening because, like I said, I was intrigued to have this conversation. And again, thank you for your time because it's new to me. And I've taken through a lot of decades of understanding that being open to at least hearing new things is going to be much better than contempt prior to investigation. But I will also say this. While our conversation seems relatively, air quotes, normal, you're saying that there is more to it from your side, and there are things that are revealed. And you also say in your materials that it's not marketing woo-woo, but I can tell you that it strikes me as a very niche avenue. And I'm curious how people understand it and how open and how easy or difficult, either way, it is for you to find clients when they start to hear a little bit about Akashic.
It's a great question. I believe that part of my purpose here, doing podcast, being on LinkedIn, working with my clients, is to overcome the spiritual bias that happens in the corporate world. If 5-10 years ago, people would have said, oh my God, we're going to have apps that are guided meditation and we're going to be doing yoga in corporate America, I think everybody would have thought that we were crazy. 3 years ago, if everybody said that AI and robots were going to be taking over a ton of our jobs and how we work, I don't know if anybody would have believed that. So when I talk about just being open to receiving messages elsewhere, I have never had any issues getting clients. When I announced kind of publicly on LinkedIn that this is what I was doing and this is how my career had evolved in the last few years, the funny thing, no one was surprised. And it's not something that's honestly all that new. I mean, Steve Jobs worked with intuitives. Carol Burnett worked with intuitives. There's a ton of very prominent leaders, celebrities who tap into these resources on a regular basis to just get additional guidance. And I'm not saying that these are the end all be all answers for everything. Honestly, I don't think there are end all be answers, end all be all answers for everything. But I do believe that we need to start thinking bigger and we need to start thinking differently about how we approach solving problems, because the way that we're doing things is not working and it's not evolving. So if I can be an early adopter in that phase and in this process, and I can help people uncover their purpose and feel more impactful in life, I feel like I've done my job. When it comes to clients, I would say 90% of my clients are referral. Almost every one of my clients sends me new clients. I think just because the experience is fun.
Okay. So it's more often than not, I'm going to use this term, it's a warm lead. It's people that at least have been given, if not an explanation or a definition, an encouragement, a referral, and a recommendation as simple as, you got to check this out, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Because for those of us that don't have someone giving us that type of encouragement, it still sounds to me very mystical, and it's been referred to, the Akashic records anyway, the whole Akashic approach has been referred to as occultism, and that's kind of the hurdle that I'm really, really curious to see how this is going to expand. And one more quick comment, and then I'm going to ask you to address everything I'm saying. You say what we are doing now isn't working, but a lot of people believe that what we're doing now is working. And I'm not saying I agree or disagree one way or the other, but it just seems to me to be a very enormous challenge and a very enormous hurdle for you and other intuitives to kind of start to get any type of significant momentum to affect the kind of change you talk about.
My goal is not to affect the world. My goal
Right?
is to make an impact on the people that I work with and then have them make an impact on the people that they work with. And I just also want to stress the intuitive part of my process is an hour and a half session. That is it.
Okay.
There's five other pieces of my process. So
Right.
I don't, I really, I think kind of get concerned when I talk about it being part of the occult and part of it being very, kind of having a negative connotation, because I don't believe that the people that I'm working with, I mean, they're running the brands of all of the
Mhm.
products that consumers buy on a regular basis and use on a regular basis. I just believe this is another source of helping people find their purpose and helping people
Okay.
live a more impactful and joyful life. So I think that the connection again with kind of religion and this idea of mysticism, because I also believe that this industry can be quite scammy and can be very misunderstood. And that's part of one of the goals that I'm trying to accomplish is to stand out from that and just be part of a solution of thinking bigger and thinking differently versus completely changing the narrative of an entire industry that I am such a minute part of.
Well, that's one of the reasons, again, just to reiterate that I was so excited that we were connected from the perspective of having you as a guest on the podcast, because I'm very open to doing everything I can to explore new concepts and new ideas. And it seems as though there's a good bit of validity to what you do, based on the fact that you've been pretty consistently successful thus far. And whether it's changing the world, which is, I think, beyond any single individual for the most part,
Agreed.
the concept of putting what you do out there and having that ripple effect certainly resonates with me. I believe in that 100%. If we put a little bit of good out, it ripples and there's a little more good, and hopefully that will continue to grow. So let me ask you on the intuitive uh, discussion that you have. Is it something that you, Elizabeth, have to focus in on and say, okay, now in this call, I'm going to be doing the intuitive data? Or is it just something that, I mean, do you have to have a mindset for that? Or do you have like an intuitive assessment of me after we've been talking for a half an hour? I mean, how does that work? Is there an on
That is
switch and an
another
off switch?
that's another great question. I have created very clear boundaries around when I turn it on and when it's not on. I am not reading you right now. I do not walk into a room and just start reading everybody around me. I'm very, very intentional about when I am focusing in and reading someone and when I'm not. I am 99% of my day, I am me. And then when I need to tune into that ability, it's like anything else. It's like, okay, so right now I'm going to ride my bike to work. And now I'm riding my bike. It's kind of like that. It's like, okay, now I am focusing in on a reading. It
Okay.
is an ability that you have to study, that you really have to practice in order to get better at it. I mean, I work with a mentor and a coach on that part of my life. I also have an executive coach that works with me on my business.
Hmm.
So there are very different ways of honing in on different professional skills. I just see this as a different professional skill.
Well, that's very well defined. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Having it as an attribute that you can choose to use as opposed to something that just overwhelms you when you least expect it, if you walk into a room, which there again is part of the whole mystery behind a lot of this type of approach, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but there's so much noise out there that there is legitimate skepticism. I mean, there's a guy you may have heard of, Edgar Cayce, Cayce, who is very much talked about people talking through him and telling the future and so there's a lot of that stuff out there, which again must create even that much more of a hurdle for you and other intuitives to get through. Is that true?
It does, but then you also think about people like Rainn Wilson, who just came out with a book called Soul Boom, and his approach to spirituality and the need for a spiritual revolution in the collective, of just how we treat each other humanely and how we go back to community and connection. So when I think about spirituality, I'm so much more of that mind than I am of I'm channeling voices through me to send messages to the world. And
Okay.
I think there is this need to combat mental health and wellness issues, racism, genderism, and all of the things that we're dealing with, loneliness, all the things that we're dealing with as a collective. If there is something that we can look to find purpose and to find impact and to find joy, it's kind of like, well, why wouldn't you do that? So I do think there are so many opportunities, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, to read books and connect. I mean, like Oprah was connecting with Eckhart Tolle on the New Earth 10 years ago, and nobody thought she was crazy. So, and Rain's book just came out. Rain's book just came out a couple weeks ago, and it is phenomenal. I mean, it is just such a great read. So I think there is spirituality on the spectrum for everyone. And the reality is, everybody who's talking about spirituality, no one's going to know if we're right or wrong until we die. And maybe not even after that. I mean, we are all just speaking about what we personally believe. We can't prove it.
Okay. Well, like I said, everybody, Elizabeth Rosenberg, CEO and owner of the Good Advice Company, it certainly brings a more unique approach than you'll often hear in the world of personal branding, certainly different than my approach. But here's what we have in common. What we have in common is looking to understand as best we can our purpose. Because
Yes.
Elizabeth, my approach is we have to know our purpose because that ignites our passion. I've never bought into follow your passion, everything would be great. Passion is temporary. Passion fades. But having a purpose, and our purpose can evolve and change as we go. So in that regard, we're 100% in sync. How we go about that, how we assess that, how we discuss that is a little bit different. But one of the things that you talk about in your materials, and I'm going to come back to the rest of your process here in a minute, but you talk about life purpose versus work purpose. And I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you to talk about that, but also how they differ, but how they complement each other and how they merge.
It really depends on the person. I think in many ways, your work purpose is how you actualize your life purpose in your day to day. It's what makes you money. But I do believe that there's this beautiful intersection of what money you make, what you enjoy to do, and what impact you will make in the world. And somewhere in the middle of there is that kind of life work purpose mix that really sparks you, brings you joy, and hopefully also makes you some money. But the way that you talk about purpose, I 1000% believe in that passion can be quite fleeting. It's kind of how I think about happiness and joy. I think happiness can be very fleeting and joy can be very sustaining.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm right with you on that one too.
Okay. And then just to reiterate, my third element there is persistence, which is what allows us to stay grounded and growing and evolving in our purpose so that the passion doesn't burn out. Back to work purpose and life purpose. Do you believe that they need to be intertwined and compatible and I'm going to say similar, if not synchronous? Or do you see that they can be and are distinctly separate?
No, I believe they should be intertwined. But just like you were talking about evolution of, your personal brand evolves, I believe your purpose evolves in
Mm-hmm.
the different places you are in life, the means that you have in order to make things happen. I mean, I think a lot of the time we're working a job to make the money we need to make in order to live at
Mm-hmm.
different points in our life, right? And maybe you're doing that your whole life. But I do believe there is this beautiful connection that you can make if you can find a way to actualize your purpose in that setting. So, and it's hard for me to kind of give examples of this because everyone's kind of work and life purpose are a little bit different. And
Mm-hmm.
what I tend to do is work with clients to make sure that we find a way to kind of talk about it in a life mission or in a way that feels like a mantra that you can really lean into. And it can be anything from healthcare equity to, you know, leaving a legacy where the people that you mentor others, and that you are continually making the world a better place just by who you are and the things that you've taught. So I think it has a lot to do with the individuals and where they
Okay.
are in their life at that moment of when we're working together.
Okay. Do you think, Elizabeth, that there is a hierarchy between the two, work purpose and life purpose?
That's a great question. The very first thing I want to say is yes, life purpose, because work is just what we do. And part of my mission in life is for everyone to be known by who you are, not what you do. So I would say life purpose is much more important. But again, I think it's so individual. I mean, there's people that are doing work that are changing the world. And if that's your legacy, that's your legacy. I don't think we all fit into one box answer on that
Yeah.
one.
Well,
Yeah.
in my experience, anyway, I'm glad you said yes, and I'm glad you said life purpose because that puts us at least in basic agreement. But I would submit that most of the people that I'm aware of, either personally or through general knowledge, that are doing things that change the world, it's not their work purpose that's driving that. It's their life purpose, and they're fulfilling their life purpose through work. So it's like when people say, "Well, what is your purpose?" And it's to make a lot of money. No, it's not. No, it's not. That's not the right measurement. And if that's the only way people think of it, they're going to end up being, I believe, very unfulfilled. So we we talk about purpose, and we talk about what you mentioned earlier of well, I'll just say my thing. So what I was going to say is life purpose leads to fulfillment. Work purpose leads to success, as it's typically defined, at least in the US. And to me, fulfillment and significance are much greater and much more rewarding, important, and impactful than success, again, as it's typically defined as getting that big job, making all that money. Thoughts on that?
I totally agree. I also think it's quite generational. Gen Z is coming into the world feeling very purpose driven, feeling much more like they need to have life experiences than adhering to what society believes we should all have as what actually defines
Mhm.
success and accomplishment. So I'm super excited to see where
Yeah.
they take things.
Well, I've got a thought there too, and this is I'm going to say it only because I had the thought, and because I'm getting to be significantly older than Gen Z by the second. I believe I know that is true, but I also believe that it is kind of a natural generational evolution because younger people throughout history learn from the older people at a much earlier age than the older people learned. So, in my experience, when I talk about significance, when I talk about fulfillment, that's where my coaching focuses primarily. That's what I want people to focus on, and in particular, as they start to get on in life, because that's where people are starting to appreciate that fulfillment versus success, just the job and the money. People are starting to look for, what is my legacy? And I know you talk about legacy in your coaching as well. So yeah, I think that the younger generation are just having a much earlier awareness of the importance of purpose than my generation certainly did. So I'm going to quit talking. I'm going to ask you another question, and you're going to have to do all the talking. Your personal branding process. So we talked about the intuitive interview because I think that is the single greatest point of differentiation between your approach and mine and many others. So from there, you kind of get back into what I would call more mainstream type work, where you've step two is behavioral analysis, then story mining, then LinkedIn coaching, and then 5 and 6, I want to hear about you. You just title them as Be You. So now that we have intuitive pretty well beaten up, give us a quick version of the other 4 or 5.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up because as you were talking, I'm like, we're actually very similar in our approach and how we really think about this. And I think that's the other thing that a lot of entrepreneurs get scared of. It's like, oh my God, I'm doing the same thing as somebody else. But everybody has a differentiator. Everybody has something that's different. And there's enough business for all of us. So again, thank you for having me on and talking about branding when we do something so similar, because I think it is important to meet other people in your field and kind of how their process differs. My second session is a behavioral analytics. So I really like to tie the intuitive data together with your kind of behavioral data to see the best ways to work. It's kind of like a personality test, but I do it with an executive coach, and it's a coaching session about your adaptability, kind of the best people that you should be working with, how you should be working. It unlocks a lot. My third session is a very intense story mining session, which I'm sure you do as well. And part of that is really, that's that mirror holding up, right? It's the helping people uncover the stories that they don't think are relevant and giving them permission to share the things that will actually move the needle in the world, that will actually make the difference. And then I think there's this beautiful balance that I do and other personal branding experts, which is threading that needle between that personal story and their professional one, to make sure that you're showing up again as a leader and as a competent professional in corporate America, but also having a little vulnerability, talking a little bit about who you are, kind of marrying those soft skills and hard skills together. Because especially after the pandemic, I think people just don't want to work with people anymore. People want to work with good people who want to make an impact in the world. So when you show up on LinkedIn and you're like, here are all of the things that I've done, and here are all the companies I've worked for, there is no differentiator for you either. No one knows who you are and if you're going to be a great person to work with. So that's really important. Then I get into a full bio redo. And this is, I think, really what sets me apart as well. Being a PR person, I give my clients 5 different versions of their bios. One is really long, different versions that you can use in different places: speaker, LinkedIn, first person. And most of my clients, after they read their new bios, email me or call me and go, oh my God, I want to work with that person. They sound amazing. And I'm like, that's you. And I think it's so hard to write your own bio. We are all the cobbler's kid with no shoes when it comes to being able to market ourselves. We're all very bad at it because we cannot see what others can see in ourselves. And then my last few sessions. Yeah, please.
Go ahead. I was just going to make a comment that speaking of different generations, for the younger generation, cobblers has nothing to do with cherry or apple cobbler. Cobbler is a shoemaker. So people going,
there you go.
What does a cobbler have to do with this shoe? Sorry to interrupt, but
it's okay.
I've always gotten amused by that.
I love it. And then my last two sessions are a full LinkedIn tutorial, which I think can be very scary for a lot of people posting on LinkedIn. But we just have to remember it's just another social media platform that collectively we as a society all agreed to post about work on. I mean, it has algorithms, you need content. It's just another strategy. And the last thing is just bringing it all together. Some people, as you know, are on a very fast timeline and want that new brand ready to go and make a splash in the world. And other people are still like quite cautious and a little nervous of putting themselves out there in a more authentic way. So it's really working with everyone on their own schedule to remind them that the authentic version of themselves is the best version and is the one that is going to be the easiest to be once you choose to be it.
So when you are working with clients and you get to the final stages, and some are eager and raring to go, and some are a little bit more hesitant, I'm going to make what I think is a well-informed guess, but it is a guess. Between your intuitive discussion and your behavioral analysis, I would suspect you have a pretty good handle on how each individual client is going to be towards the end. Is that fair?
No, the
Really? Okay.
evolution, no, yeah, you'd think I would, as an intuitive, know exactly how this is all going to play out. Um, the evolution that they go through from the intuitive session 6 to 8 weeks later to the full plan is massive. The growth that we go through, the personal development that we go through, obviously the professional development that we go through, and everyone is a little bit different. So the person that I
Okay.
end with is never the person that I started with.
I understand that. I just was thinking that in my case, behavioral analysis has been a pretty good indicator of quick adapters and people that are more slow. Anyway, it was just a guess and an incorrect guess in your case, and I'm happy to admit I was wrong. So, final question for you, because I'm going to respect your time, and again, thank you for the gift of your time. When you put all this together, when you look at your corporate career, the burnout, the lack of a future, and then everything that's happened since then, and the embracing of and putting out there your intuitiveness, when you look at it and put it all together, Elizabeth, share with us what's the point.
The point is, I really have found my calling. I finally get to do a job that not only I really, really love to do, that I get paid well to do, but also I get to see the impact that I'm making in the world and the positive changes that I'm making with all my clients that I work with. And I'm also seeing a spiritual evolution in the collective world that we live in. And that's exciting. So right now, the point is, it got me all to here. I kind of can't wait to see where we go next.
Beautiful. And that's an exciting part of it. It really is. So again, thank you for your time, everyone. This is Elizabeth Rosenberg, the CEO, founder of The Good Advice Company, which you can find on the internet at thegoodadvicecompany.com. This and other information will be in the show notes. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your very insightful questions. I had to really think on a bunch of those, so I appreciate it.
Well, good. I'm glad. And let me just say this on behalf of Elizabeth and myself to everyone listening. If you don't have a coach, consider getting a coach, whether it's an intuitive approach like Elizabeth or whether it's a little different approach like mine. Reach out to Elizabeth, reach out to myself, reach out to someone who you have been referred to, but find a coach because, Tom Brady in football is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Guess what? He had coaches. You can look in sports, you can look in life, you can look at all levels. Having a coach, having an independent view of yourself is only going to be something that's going to help you as you go through life. It's helped me, it's helped Elizabeth, and listeners, I'm sure it'll help you. So good luck with that. And again, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to speaking more later.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.